Thank you for attending Unleash Real-Time Collaboration on Adobe Creative Projects. My name is Glenn Schock. I run alliances for Panzura. With me, I have Paul Danis, who is our Senior Solutions Architect. And from DZ, we have Alex Jasperson, who will be kicking this off, and I will pass it over to him.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Hello, everyone. As Glenn said, my name is Alex Jasperson. I am the sales manager here at DZ Solutions. I think based off of the list here, I think most of you are probably familiar with DZ, but for those of you who aren't, we're a systems integrator or value-added reseller focused on providing on-prem, hybrid, and cloud networking and network security services and hardware software sales. We're based in Los Angeles with staff in Las Vegas, New York, and North Carolina. And we also have quite a large international reach with business entities in Canada, the UK, the EU, South Africa, and Australia. A large portion of our business is done within the media and entertainment space. Our CEO worked for several editorial and visual effects shops before founding DZ in 2005. So those M&E workflows have been in our core competency since day one. Key differentiator is, without a doubt, our engineering or technical capabilities. We've maintained at least a 2-to-1 engineering to sales staff ratio since being founded, which obviously allows us to provide a vast majority of our clients with professional services that many of them utilize, from staff augmentation to pre-sales engineering, implementation, or even 24/7 support. In terms of our partnership with Panzura, we've been working pretty closely with them since the middle of last year. As you can imagine, we have been working with our clients on various hybrid and public cloud projects for several years now, from on-prem storage replacement, migrations, archive, DR, to security audits. In 2020, as our client base began to scale their multi-cloud environments to support new or growing data sets and obviously a remote workforce, we knew that there was going to be a need and an increased interest in a platform like Panzura that could allow users to collaborate on projects with ease, no matter where they were located. So today's presentation is going to be centered around Panzura's ability to support Adobe Creative workflows, specifically Adobe Premiere. And as I mentioned earlier, DZ was built by supporting clients with these types of workflows. So before I pass it back over to Glenn, I'd like to just quickly touch upon some of the reasons why our clients are looking at Panzura, and why I imagine most of you are here listening to us today. And then really quickly, again, before I get into this, if you have any questions, please feel free to just pop those into the questions bar here, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. All right, so reducing storage costs and footprint. This has obviously been a trend for several years now, moving away from on-prem infrastructure to reduce various capital and operational expenditures. This increased exponentially for many companies in 2020 as the need to cut back on excess expense became top priority. Media, more so than many other verticals, truly rely on delivering content as quickly and efficiently as possible. So as productions are spinning back up here in 2021, I imagine that time to market is going to be even more critical as we look to make up for lost time and try to meet the ever-growing demand for content. And then finally, security. Certainly don't need to explain this one. It's been a while now. However, I'm sure we surely remember a certain security breach in 2014 that changed the security landscape within the media industry forever. Keeping our assets, our pre-release content highly available and secure is certainly priority number one. Click. Again, a trend that's been forming for several years now and was only accelerated in 2020, remote or multi-site collaboration, and what storage decisions do we need to make in order to keep up. This is certainly a pain point for many of our clients who have a traditional multi-site NAS environment, let's say they're supporting studios in Los Angeles, in New York, or Vancouver. Sharing files between sites means constantly waiting for replication to complete. And when it does complete, many times they only have read-only access. So, we'll get more into this, but with Panzura, the ability to share and collaborate on files between sites is almost instantaneous. Another similar example in terms of pain points that we commonly see, studios or companies supporting remote editors by actually shipping them dedicated storage arrays. So I've seen clients dedicate arrays to every department on a film project, right? Editorial, production, dailies, art department, etc. Those systems had to either then replicate home or be brought back in when the project was wrapped. So buying multiple storage arrays that you have to track and manage, with Panzura, we don't have that problem. Click. So we know that, after many years of working with various cloud providers, that this is really only part of the answer. Moving everything up to the cloud certainly did not solve all of our problems. Cloud was designed to work with cloud services, right? Web servers, deep archive. We're using it for production because it's available and it's improving, but it wasn't built for M&E and our use cases. And so we still have quite a few challenges when using it, right? How do we handle file locking capabilities? Latency is a constant concern and pain point. When file open times are slow and teams can't collaborate, right? We get cranky creatives and nobody likes that. And then finally, egress charges. The cost to get data up into the cloud, make it a no-brainer. Once we start pulling files down, it certainly becomes a different story. And I know Glenn will go into more detail on that in a minute. And again, with Panzura integrated into your environment, we're able to address and to a large degree alleviate all of these pain points. And so I hope that kind of helps set the table for what Glenn is going to share with us next. Glenn?
Thank you. Again, if you have questions, I am monitoring the questions box. Just ask, and one of the panelists will kind of chime in and interrupt me. So what is Panzura? Panzura is a next generation NAS platform that's essentially a global file system that installs at the edge, so at your local location as well as in the cloud via VMs, and uses an object store as a backend. So an example of a cloud object store would be Amazon S3 or Google for GCS or Microsoft Azure Blob, as well as others like Wasabi, MinIO, RStore, really whoever you want to use in the back end. If you like on-premises object stores, we have IBM Cause and Cloudian. So that's what this array is essentially it's a cloud object store that to be very inexpensive for storage and also relatively fast because most are deployed on top of SSDs. At the edge, Panzura is a software-based filer. So we install via VMware or via Hyper-V on premises. So we feel like a local NAS because we utilize local resources such as CPU, memory, and local NVMe that we use to cache your data at the edge. Once we install, and here we have San Francisco, we have New York, and then as well as a VM somewhere in the cloud, and I'll get to more of that a little bit later, but we are in all three cloud marketplaces, so in AWS and Google, as well as in Microsoft, and we can install automatically and as a VM in all the various clouds, and the applications for that are numerous, and we'll get to those in a minute. So when we do install on these three sites, for example, when a user attaches to a Panzura filer, exactly as they would to a traditional NetApp or Isilon or anything else via NFS or CIFS or SMB, all right, CIFS and SMB are the same thing effectively, they will all see the same global file system. So a user in San Francisco and a user in New York will log in and they will see the exact same global file system, which allows for that kind of collaborative sharing. Where Panzura goes above and beyond for the media entertainment space, specifically for the Adobe Creative Suite and Adobe Premiere, is that the application supports the concept of byte range locking. All right, so to be a genuine enterprise class global file system, you have to lock very conservatively so as not to corrupt user data. So there's always a balance of performance to lock management. And not to get too technical, but Panzura, again, is an enterprise class GFS, which means that the way that we handle locking needs to ensure that your data is number one, first and foremost. So I'm going to give you an example of a basic file write, and then we'll talk about what collaboration looks like. So when you drop a file in San Francisco, let's say I'm really proud of my 10 meg PowerPoint file, this presentation, for example, I'm going to drop in the global file system, and then this local Panzura filer will have the lock because that's the last place a write operation occurred. And let's call that version 1. It's the first time it got dropped in. Now time has gone by. Oops. There we go. Time has gone by, and somebody in New York wants to open that file. The Panzura filer is going to request the lock from San Francisco, and it's going to ingest that data because it's the first time that it's seen that file. So it's going to ingest that data, and it's going to get the right lock in New York. They're going to make some changes and save the file. So here's some interesting news. It's a little bit different than traditional NAS systems. All of our I/O is immutable. So every time we do a write to the back end, it's immutable, which means that all the writes and even deletions, let's say somebody wanted to delete a slide, that is additive data, right? So I can go through this 10 meg PowerPoint file over the course of years on this file system, and any user that has access to that file can recover a different version of it, like from a year ago or 2 years ago, or let's say we made some changes that we didn't like 15 minutes ago. You can recover from that point in time. What that means is that we are natively immune to ransomware, right? Because all of our writes are immutable, and you get hit with ransomware, all that is a brand new write of an encrypted file. I can just basically go back to a different point in time, right? So that's a kind of an added benefit with the way that we do our I/O. Now going back to our lock management, a write happened in New York, and we're good, everything is fine. Now I'm open it back up in San Francisco to check the changes. When I open it back up, I'm going to add a graphic, right? Let's say that's my intent. So I already have a previous cached version of that file because I'm the original one that dropped it in the Panzura filer. So I want to request this lock from New York because that's the last place the write occurred. I'm going to say, hey, I have version 1 and I want the lock. The Panzura filer in New York is going to say, hey, we're currently on version 2. A slide got deleted. Here's the block delta, right? And transfers that information over to San Francisco, hands it the lock as well as the change. Notice that we didn't do any egress, and we're going to talk about that later on, but we really do our best to minimize egress fees outside of the cloud. Right? When I came on board to this company about 8-9 months ago, one of the things I was mostly concerned about was the cost associated with doing a global file system to a backend object store that's in the cloud. And I saw some of our customers' egress fees, and they're actually ridiculously low. I couldn't actually believe it because of the amount of intelligent caching that we do at the edges. Right? We ensure that we're really minimizing the egress fees for you. Right? Also notice that the changes were shipped between the two Panzura filers over a network. So again, you're not incurring an egress fee from the object store. So let's say I want to make that graphic change. I make a change and I wrote now version 3, and then if anybody can open that up. So that is file-based locking, right? So we're locking just that file, that PowerPoint file that we're moving back and forth. In the case of Adobe Premiere, since the application supports byte range locking, I can have a single file open in 2 locations at exactly the same time because the application supports it, and so does the Panzura filer. So when we open a file in San Francisco and open the exact same file in New York, we can work on 2 different portions of that file simultaneously And the two Panzura filers are going to be in constant communication with one another. Also, both of those filers have that exact same file cached locally. So as a user, your look and feel feels like you got a custom box delivered to your location, right, for your project. But at the end of the day, when you hit save, it saves to a backend object store and is available to all of your locations simultaneously, open for read and write. And that is the joy of byte range locking. If the application supports it, so do we. And it's a lot of work that goes on between the two Panzura filers. It's a lot of metadata exchange, a lot of lock management, but it's all done very conservatively to ensure that the byte range that you are working on is not impacted by anybody else. I don't see any questions in here, so I'm assuming that that all made sense. Paul, that makes sense to you? Anything to add there?
I'm absolutely fine with it.
All right.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to it is the easy way to think about it, especially for people that are not technically savvy. I look at this as like a single Windows server I cut into pieces, and I put one in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and in New York, and up in the cloud. So they're actually working with a local server in their office. And when I talk that way, they tend to make sense for them. If it works on a Windows server in a single site, why wouldn't it work against multiple sites on a Panzura?
Yep. Perfect. And we can go back a little bit to that immutability. Again, when we do any I/O to the backend object store, it is entirely additive. So there's a couple of things that go with that. One, if you work for a company that requires some kind of regulation that you have to delete everything after 7 years or after 20 years, you can set a policy to delete everything after that point in time. We even support the concept of secure erase. But what's beautiful about this is that you can recover at the user level to any point in time for that file. Not only does it make us immune to ransomware, but what we're finding is that the folks that use a cloud-based object store in the back end, they don't do backups and they don't do remote replication. Why is that? Well, we don't need a remote replication because Google or Amazon or Microsoft are replicating your data 3 ways, in most cases within the same region, 3 different data centers within 50 kilometers of one another. And some of them can replicate cross-geo without any financial impact to you. So you're still paying your 2 cents per gig per month. So you have basically 2 data centers in one geo, in one region, and then 1 data center in another region. So your data is already being remote replicated. It is inherently being off-sited and it meets all of the compliance requirements. The second thing with regards to backups, right? And again, going back to replication, normally if you had a edge NAS system and you wanted to save your data for offsiting, you would remote replicate it to another one. So you have to pay twice as much for storage. Here, you're paying your fixed cost for backend object store. As for backups, most companies tend to use about 3 to 6 times their capacity to do backups, right? Because you're doing your fulls and you're doing your incrementals and you do fulls every couple weeks or every month. And then some even go above and beyond and remote replicate their backups as well. So depending on the types of companies that I've been talking to, it's at least 3x to 6x the capacity. Well, if you're already doing offsiting because your object store is offsite in the cloud, and that's 3-way replicated, and our data is immutable, which means it's not going to change for every kind of I/O that you do the back end, what are you doing backups for? Because you can recover our file system from any snapshot from any point in time, right? And it's available from 3 different data centers, at least. And then Panzura will be releasing at the end of this month or beginning of next month the concept of cloud mirroring. So you can actually do a write split to 2 different object stores if you don't trust your primary. You don't really need to do backups, and that's going to give you significant cost savings. And we'll be talking about that in a couple of slides. So the technology.
What I find,
yep.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Glenn.
Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, from a user's perspective, the thing looks like a Windows server. You know, we're talking about the cloud and the capabilities. It's really from the user's perspective, what do they see? They see a server in their office. And what we do, the snapshotting that Glenn's talking about, the way I describe it is because of inherently how we write an object to the cloud, via a snapshot, we actually have snapshots from the beginning of time. So you define how far back you want to protect your data.
Yep.
That's how I
And
look at the process.
with DSS, so they can recover at any point in time. If you give the user that capability, they can take another image of that file from last week or last month or last year and push it out to another directory and make it available. All right, in case you wanted to see what happened that long ago to that file. So what Panzura brings to the table is next generation NAS, right? We're using the cloud. We're using all the technology that the hyperscalers are bringing to you, right? In the concept of through-array replication. And then once your data is in the cloud, you can do more stuff with it, right? So if you put a Panzura filer in a VM in Google or in Microsoft or in Amazon, you have all these cloud native services that you can then leverage against your unstructured data set. You can go from unstructured to structured, run NoSQL, run analytics. So not only can we support your creative workflows, but you can go above and beyond and take that data into the cloud native services because it's already there, right? And again, no egress fees there because it's going to be local to where your object store is. So we're a next generation NAS, we're a global file system. We do your user data management. We protect you against ransomware. We keep you from requiring backups or any remote replications. So we really lower your management costs because traditionally every site would need its own NAS box. You have to manage it and you have to deal with directories and all that kind of stuff. We're centralizing your data. So you don't have to worry about deduplication, right? Because historically, if you're using the same file in two different locations, you have two copies of it, you're using twice as much storage. With Panzura, you have one copy of it, right? And it's stored in the object store here. So we're really simplifying your life while also enabling this next level of collaboration with byte level locking and native support for the Adobe Creative Suite. Any comments from, or anything I missed from the rest of my panelists here? Alex, we good with that?
Yep, that all sounds great.
Awesome. All right, so improving designer workflow. That's exactly what we just talked about. And this is the demo that Paul will be giving you at the end of this session, right? The goal here is to limit your amount of copies, right? Either pushing it to the cloud, into a Dropbox, into Shadow IT, or just making copies between various on-premises NAS. We can allow both users to open the same file for read and write, or three users to open the same file for read and write to a byte range to simplify your life, to make things go faster for you, to finish the project sooner. And that's what the technology should enable. Reducing egress costs. I'm not seeing my screen change. There we go. Reducing egress costs. We just talked about this a little bit. What does this mean? So if you're not technical, egress, any cloud provider, they charge you nothing for putting data into the cloud, so like the object store, but they do charge you money to pull data from the cloud. Now, if you have a global file system at various locations, all connected to the same object store, the thought is obviously it's going to be pulling a ton of data from the cloud. So if I open up a 10 gig file, I have to pay for that 10 gig file over and over and over again at every edge for opens. That's actually not the case with the Panzura filer. Because we have caching at the edge, and it's intelligent caching, and we have that constant communication between the Panzura filers for shipping deltas. So when you're doing collaboration, those two Panzura filers are in constant communication, and that's not going through the backend object store. Changes are being saved to the backend object store, but any information that the other simultaneous user needs to have is in constant communication between the Panzura filers. We are lowering your egress costs dramatically. All right, so the impact of doing a global file system to a backend object store is not, it's not going to cost you nowhere near what you'd actually think it would. All right, so it's kind of neat technology that Panzura has implemented to lower your cloud costs. 1/3 the total cost of ownership. This is a bold statement. What's it actually mean? So if you have multiple sites, 3 sites, 4 sites, 5 sites, and you're doing collaboration across those sites, normally you would need to deploy storage at each of those locations. And you'd have to manage that storage. You'd have to back it up. You'd have to remote replicate it. So when you take in all the costs associated with the original copy, the remote replication, the 3 to 6 times the backups, the deduplication, right, when you centralize it, the ease of management of having one global file system. What we're finding for our customers is at 3 sites or more, we're 1/3 the total cost of ownership when compared to putting NAS in each of those locations. If you're getting up to 5 sites, 6 sites, we're 1/4 the cost of traditional storage, right? And your cost savings come from the deduplication of data, the management costs, the backup costs, not only the buying backups, but also doing them, and then worrying about worrying about recovery, what your RPO and RTO is. You don't have to worry about that with Panzura because you can recover to any point in time, at any point in time, to either another file system or within the existing file system. And then finally, remote replication. So when you boil all that down, everything that we do to simplify all of this, because of our inherent nature being immutable and not requiring backups, not requiring remote replication because your cloud provider is already doing it, we end up at 1/3 the cost on average, right? I mean, so you're not only getting all this neat technology with collaboration, but you're paying 2/3 less than you normally would if you're a multi-site environment. I'm not getting these transitions. There we go. And then lastly, we're keeping data secure. Right? We are FIPS 140-2 certified, which means that we have a whole heck of a lot of government customers. What this means is that we're storing everything encrypted. So it's all AES 256 encryption, and then we're doing TLS across the wire. So everything is natively secure. Also, like I mentioned before, because we're immutable, we protect you against ransomware. It's kind of like the cherry on top of the sundae, right? Is not only all the collaboration stuff neat, and we do all the global file system stuff, and we're saving you money, but without any other solution, you are inherently immune to ransomware. Because and I want to talk about that for 1 second. What does that mean? So when you get hit with ransomware, all of your data starts getting encrypted, right? So there's a rogue machine on your network somewhere that's infected, and it's attached to your NAS devices, and it is just starting to encrypt all the data. When you start encrypting data on a Panzura filer, all that becomes is a brand new write on top of all the other data that you've made. So let's say my 10 meg PowerPoint file that I'm very keen of, like that gets encrypted. It's a new 10 meg write on top of my previous PowerPoint file and all the changes that have been happening to it over the course of the years. So how do I revert? I just go back in VSS to the previous version that's no longer encrypted. Panzura is very proud to say that none of our customers have ever paid a ransom for any data that they had on Panzura. We have had a couple of customers that have been forced to pay ransoms for data that they did not have on the Panzura file system. So that's the benefit of us, right? And it comes native, right? It comes with the product because of its immutability. Do I have any questions? No questions yet?
Questions.
All right. And then I'm going to introduce Paul to talk about the case study.
Hi, guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the case study here, which is an interesting one. They've been with us for a little over 5 years, and their main concern that they were dealing with is they've got different location spans, around 300,000 customers every day come and visit these guys. In Europe is where these guys are located at. And a lot of their design, their creatives, is actually occurring in 3 main locations around London, New York, and Hong Kong. And if you think about the geo of where those things are, there's definitely a distance in here. And one of the biggest challenges that they have, especially as we go through the process of creating things, is really the latency that occurs between each of those different environments. So what they ended up doing is they would create silos of information. I'm going to work on this, and then when I'm done doing this, I'm going to pass it off to you, and then wait a couple of days for the information to actually show up and go forward and moving on. And the challenge that they run into is really the significance and the latency of having that data available to them. Because when you're getting close to crunch time, where you need to, send it off to the printers or, get it up into social media, there is a timeline where things have to happen. What Panzura has done for these guys is the capability of actually presenting the same data in every location and be aware of who's working on it. So if you're working like things like InDesign or Illustrator, you have the same model or the same design, same drawing, same artboards that are in front of every user, and you're aware of who's working on what. I'm going to show you Premiere Pro in the conversation here in a couple of seconds. And this plays with the traditional Premiere Pro concept, which is what I'll show you, but it also plays the concept of the new feature that Premiere just came up with about 8 months ago called Productions, where Productions gives you the capability of identifying all assets, B-roll, your stock images, all the things that you have as it relates to a production itself, and be able to collab and share within those projects independently, and have a way of identifying back and forth between both of those locations who's going to have what. So without that, I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. So I am going to share my screen. So hang on a second. I need to make sure I'm working on the right screen. Is this the screen? Pop it over. Am I on the right screen? Hang on. Nope, wrong screen. Hang on. I have to click on the right one. Screen 1. There we go. Got it. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep, we got you.
Okay. Good.
Here we go.
Expand.
Guys, I call this the world's most boring demo. I talked about it a little bit ago. I said, picture the idea of a single window server I cut into pieces. In this case, I'm actually working this up in the out in the cloud. I'm actually in Google in this particular regard, and I'm actually leveraging their multi-region location. So in the East, I have a server in Virginia. I have another one in Oregon, and I'm not doing anything special. These particular boxes are just using remote desktop, nothing special. So these are not GPU boxes. I'm not running Teradici or anything like that to make it faster. This is really just a PC in the cloud. And that's what I'm going to work with. And emphasize the fact this is Virginia and this is Oregon. Let's do a quick little ping test. When I do that ping test, you'll actually see that I'm talking to 2 different servers. PZ East is obviously local, 1 millisecond. PZ West, which is 58 milliseconds. I like to run it twice just to see if I get a different number. But these are the real numbers that we're seeing from site to site as we're communicating to each location. Now, the product that I'm going to be working for, or the project that I'm going to be working on, is Premiere Pro. And the data that I'm working with is actually, I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that what you see here is you'll see the E drive, which is the Q drive here. And so when I see this particular data, I see all these different projects and car designs and sources and productions, things like that. And when I go over to Oregon, I see the same information. In this case, the PZ West. If you see the PZ East and the PZ West, double click on that, you see PZ East and PZ West in both of those locations. And you would expect, if this is a single server that I'm cutting to pieces, if I go over here and I create a brand new file, let's say I create, I don't know, let's create a text doc, right? If I go through the process of creating a text doc over here, waiting for it to come up, let's try it again. Apparently I did something wrong. Okay, and I call this pro test, right? When I go to the process of creating this, if I go over here and I right click and I hit refresh, because this is a single file system, I expect that data to show up in both locations. What you're seeing here is the data is going to be showing up here, and it takes about 90 seconds for that data to show up. And then what we're going to do here is also create that file over here and create another one called new file. And when I create new file, and I right-click on this particular space, what you're going to see is an instant relocation of that particular file. That's the idea of presenting a particular file in multiple locations. So if you think about the workflow of running a traditional Premiere Pro project, what you're doing is you're working in a project in one location, and then when you're done with it, you pass the hat, so to speak, over to the next guy. So you might have somebody that's good with the audio, or somebody that's good with some of the graphics or the final touches that you want to do, or if you're doing grading and things like that. It allows you, or if you, even if it's the manager that needs to take a look at it to make sure, how are we progressing? What I'm doing here is I've got a simple little project that I'm working with. In this case, I'm going to call it New Test. And as you see, I'm going to use the Q drive, which is going to that content directory that I was showing before. And again, the Q drive here as it relates to the West. So if I'm going to go here into the Q drive, I'm going to go ahead and open that project. I'm going to open up this project in read-write mode. This is me working it. Again, I'm not doing anything special. I am running just a remote desktop session. And what you see here from this experience is actually pretty decent. I don't have any audio, so I don't have anything playing as it relates to that regard. But you see, it's a pretty decent workflow, and I actually can work with this. I'm a commercial drone pilot, so I do a lot of drone imagery and stuff. I do my own post-processing and stuff. But you see, I can actually scrape through this pretty decently and find certain aspects of what I'm wanting to accomplish. But to show the effort of what we wanted to do, let's go ahead and open this other side. And you'll notice right here, it says read only. It recognizes that this user has that lock, and one of the easiest way to figure it out is the read-write command, or the read-write icon that exists here. This file is rewritable. This one is read-only. What I can do in the read-only or the read-write state is I can make any changes that I want. If I want to add variations, I want to go through and change like that particular process. What I can do is in Virginia, I go ahead and click on this. It's native to the workflow. It goes ahead and saves that particular workflow. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Oregon, which again is 61 milliseconds away. I click on the lock over here. When I click on that lock message, it says, hey, there's a change that occurred over here. And what it does is it reloads that particular model, and it allows me to continue to edit those particular models and do whatever I want. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and reset that particular item. Again, I'm in Detroit, so the latency that is existing here is actually not that bad, and I'm able to work with this process. So the transfer of information back and forth is extremely quick as we go through this process. Same thing going back again. I want to go ahead and release that particular file. And then I go over here into this particular version, and I go through and it says, hey, there's a change that's just been made. Again, this is one of the most boring demos you ever saw. It's just a single Windows server I cut into pieces. The capability of being able to drive this particular project and be able to deliver things, in the case from London to New York to Hong Kong, to have the people working in real time against these data and be aware who's working on what. Now, if you're working on things like productions and things like that, that gives you the capability of actually looking at it in a real collaborative sense. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's actually really cool. It gives us the capability of starting to share assets without having to duplicate assets. So, if I want to grab, these two particular parts of this and scrape it and put it in another project, because it's within that same asset, it actually decreases the amount of data. How this process works is actually what Glenn was talking about. It's deduplicating and compressing, and it's recognizing that there is differences in how the user's accessing the data. The way that I design the architecture, we expect that 95% of the I/O, in other words, 95% of all user requests, is actually serviced by that PC or that filer, that Panzura that's in the office. And that's the reason I can get the performances that you're seeing here. If I want to go through and I want to add something, in this case, this guy doesn't have read-write access. If I go over here and I try to make a change, I can't do it because I own it, but if I don't own it, but over here I do. So I can make whatever changes that I need to this particular process to make it available. Guys, like I said, it's one of the most boring demos you ever saw. It's just a single Windows server that cut into pieces. This works with Premiere Pro. It works with Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, a lot of the other options that we have. Is there any questions that you guys have? Is there anything that you need to see or anything you want to go into? I can go quite tech if you want to.
We don't have any questions in the questions box. Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome.
Demo. All right.
Okay, with that, I guess Mr. Alex, if you want to roll it up, since we have no questions.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I will just say to everybody, if you are interested in a more, one-on-one session, if you do have some questions that come up, we'd be happy to set up the time to chat with you. You can reach out to either myself. You can reach me at alex@dzsolutions.com, and I can put you in touch with the correct Panzura account team.
Thank you,
Paul,
everybody.
Glenn, anything else?
No, thank you, everybody, for attending the session. If you have any questions, please reach out to DZ Solutions or Panzura, and we will work together to make this all happen. Thank you.